Support for the show comes from the Audible original The Downloaded 2, Ghosts in the Machine. Earth's final days are near, and the clock is ticking for members of the Phoenix colony. All they need to do is upload their minds back into the quantum computer. Simple enough. But their plan is disrupted by digital duplicates of their own minds that could destroy their stored consciousness forever. Listen to Oscar winner Brendan Fraser reprise his role as Roscoe Kadulian in this follow-up to the Audible hit sci-fi thriller The Downloaded by Canada's most decorated sci-fi author, Sawyer. What are you willing to find out in the thought-provoking sequel, The Downloaded 2, Ghosts in the Machine, available now, only from Audible.
You know those recruiter texts you get? The ones offering you a ton of money for basically the work?
Base pay is $2,000.
You receive $720. You know it's a scam. But ever wonder what would happen if you actually responded?
This is where, if I wasn't going into this eyes wide open, this is probably where like the red flags are showing up.
This week on Explain It to Me, where those texts come from and where they just might take you. New episodes Sundays wherever you get your podcasts.
It's Unexplainable. I'm Noam Hassenfeld. For a lot of people, figuring out what you're meant to do with your life is a long, drawn-out process. But for some lucky ones, a career path becomes clear in an instant.
Well, I've always been very interested in music. I spent all my time playing the piano and composing and so on.
For Diana Deutsch, that moment happened back in the 50s. But it didn't go exactly how she imagined it.
My music teacher performed at the BBC third program in the mornings.
She was playing piano in a trio.
And I was asked to be a page turner.
Essentially, she'd be turning the pages of the sheet music so her teacher wouldn't have to stop playing.
So I went up to BBC House, and I was all of 16 at the time and very excited about doing this.
Diana had always dreamed of being a musician, so even just turning pages on the BBC felt like the big time.
What happened was I turned the first page, no problem. I turned the second page, no problem. When it came to the third page, unfortunately, my hand jerked and all the pages flew down onto the floor. The poor lady had to, while playing the piano with one hand, pick up the pieces with the other one. It was a terrible experience.
Diana came face to face with her dream, and she knew with complete clarity that it wasn't for her.
It certainly made me realize that being a performing musician was probably not a good idea for me.
Instead of aiming for a career as a performer, Diana got into researching the psychology of music, particularly how different people perceive sounds. And she was one of the first people to study this by generating synthesized tones using enormous mainframe computers. One day in 1973, she was experimenting with playing two sequences at the same time.
And I had no idea what would happen, but I thought it would be interesting to try.
You can actually hear exactly what Diana heard back then, but only if you're listening on headphones. So if you have a pair around, now would be a good time to put them in.
I started off with a high tone alternating with a low tone in one ear, and at the same time, a low tone alternating with a high tone in the other ear.
High-low on one side, low-high on the other.
And what I heard seemed incredible. I heard a single high tone in my right ear that alternated with a single low tone in the left ear.
Both ears were getting high-low sequences, but she wasn't hearing them in both ears. She only heard high tones on the right and low tones on the left.
Just as a kind of knee-jerk reaction, I switched the headphones around, and it made no difference to what I perceived. The high tones remained in my right ear and the low tones remained in my left ear.
If you have headphones on, flip them around. there's probably no difference.
I went out into the corridor and pulled in as many people as I could. And by the end of that afternoon, I must have tested, I don't remember how many, but probably dozens of people. And most of them heard exactly what I heard.
Diana literally couldn't believe it.
I was beside myself. It seemed to me that, I'd entered another universe, or I'd gone crazy, or something. It just seemed that the world had just turned upside down.
I first talked to Diana a couple years ago when I originally recorded this episode, and I haven't been able to stop thinking about what she told me. How so much of what we hear isn't the actual world out there. How a lot of it is constructed in our brain. So I decided to make a whole unexplainable series about it. It's called The Sound Barrier. Over the next 4 episodes, we're going to explore the limits of hearing and the ways we can break through. From someone relearning how to listen to music after hearing loss, to people trapped by the sounds in their heads, to astronomers who figured out a way to listen to space. A lot of the concepts in our series flow directly out of this original hearing episode with Diana. So as we get ready to dive deep on sound, I wanted to start here.
Napkins.
What are we actually hearing
Thank you.
when we're hearing? Before we get to all the unknowns, let's start with what we do know about sound.
Sound is rapid changes in air pressure that happen when something is vibrating.
Matthew Wynn, audiologist, University of Minnesota.
So you can think of it in the same way that you think of a wave in a pond. None of the water particles move very far. They just sort of bob up and down, but they set a whole wave into motion. And it's like a domino effect moving through space.
This pressure wave travels through the air.
And then, a whole chain of events will set into motion in your ear.
The wave passes through the ear canal,
The eardrum vibrates back and forth.
and a few little bones amplify that vibration, sending it deeper toward the cochlea, this spiral-shaped organ in the inner ear that's covered with thousands of hair cells.
The cochlea is where the sensory cells are that pick up the sound and turn it into something the brain can use.
Pressure waves become electrical impulses, which are eventually interpreted as sound.
So it sounds like a long, complicated process, but it's extremely fast. I mean, there's no sense that's faster than hearing. Your ear can do this whole process thousands of times per second.
All of that, the pressure waves, the ear vibrations, the transformation to electrical impulses, that's the simple part, the part we know. The complicated part is pretty much going to take up the rest of this episode. There's a difference between the pressure waves that enter our ears and what we actually end up hearing.
If we actually perceived every different sound that came in, we would be utterly confused.
Take Matthew's voice, for example.
Even in the room that I'm in right now, I'm just in a room in my house, there are echoes all around me because anytime you have a flat surface on a table, a wall, a computer screen, anything, the sound will in fact reflect off of it.
All of these echoes bouncing around should theoretically make sounds really hard to locate in space.
And so if we hear that and then hear another echo coming from the wall on my right, and then I hear an echo coming off the ceiling and then my table, how would I know which direction the sound is coming from? It's coming from all directions.
But our brain has an answer.
Thankfully, our brain knows. Sounds only come from one direction. And that's the only way the world makes sense.
In order to function in the real world, our brain makes a guess.
It perceives that first wave of sound coming in, and then every subsequent reflection of that sound, it's like saying, okay, I can suppress you, which is why a lot of people aren't even aware that there are echoes, because our brain is so good at suppressing them.
Our brain essentially edits our auditory experience.
The way I like to phrase it is that the brain is being nudged in a direction rather than just straight out reading the world.
Which is exactly what Diana stumbled across that day in the 70s when she was flipping her headphones back and forth.
It just seemed that the world had just turned upside down.
These days, auditory illusions aren't as unheard of as they used to be. But Diana's a big reason why. She's now a psychology professor at UC San Diego, and she's been using computer-generated sounds to study the brain's editor for decades. With that first illusion she discovered, Diana thinks two parts of your brain are disagreeing, the parts that determine pitch and location. That's why you hear a high tone on one side and a low tone on the other, even though they're really on both sides. Diana couldn't.
Of course, I didn't sleep much that night. This can't be the kind of thing.
Diana started wondering whether she could design other illusions to learn more about the brain's internal machinery.
In the same way as, if a piece of equipment such as a car breaks down, you can find out a lot about the way the car works just by predicting what went wrong.
So she started brainstorming.
I was sort of half asleep and I was imagining notes jumping around in space, and by the next morning they had sort of crystallized into what I named the scale illusion.
The scale illusion. Just like before, this illusion consists of two tone sequences, one in each ear.
So there's one channel alone,
Some high notes, some low notes,
and then the other channel alone,
some more high notes, some more low notes.
and then you hear them together again.
If you're listening on headphones, you're probably hearing all the high notes on one side and all the low notes on the other, even though those notes are actually jumping from left to right. That's your brain editing. It's to reflect the way the world usually.
One would assume that sounds that are in a higher pitch range are coming from one source and sounds in a lower pitch range.
Brain assumes is happening here.
The brain reorganizes the sounds in space in accordance with this.
Just like removing echoes, this kind of brain editing would normally help you make sense of the world. But Diana's illusion is explicitly designed to fool the brain into making a wrong guess. And not everyone's brain makes the same guess.
Left-handers as a group are likely to be hearing something different from right-handers as a group.
Right-handers tend to hear high tones on the right side, but for left-handers, it's more complicated. They're likelier than other people to hear high tones on the left, or in even weirder ways. All of this reorganization, the way the brain edits our hearing to help us navigate the real world, it's sometimes called top-down processing.
Top-down processing occurs when the brain uses expectation, experience, and also various principles of perceptual organization to influence what is. Instead
of up processing, which is sensing the world and then having that travel up to the brain, top-down processing means that our brain is influencing how we hear. To some extent, our brain is hearing what we are expecting to hear. In a sense, a lot of what we perceive isn't actually us hearing sound waves hit our eardrum. It's a prediction of what those waves should be. To illustrate this, Diana uses something called the mysterious melody. This is a well-known tune, but the notes are presented in different octaves. For all the non-music folks out there, an octave is basically a standard range of musical notes. In this illusion, notes stay the same, but which range they're played in changes. So instead of playing do, re, mi in the same range with all the notes next to each other, you could play do, re, mi with the notes jumping into a different range. So Diana takes a well-known tune, changes the range. And the question is, can people recognize this melody? And in fact, people can't recognize the melody. Now listen to a simplified version of the same sequence.
In this case, all the notes are in the same octave.
Same range. You know what it is.
Yeah, indeed, it's Yankee Doodle.
And a lot of times when people go back and listen to the scrambled version, they can hear Yankee Doodle in there. When you have a frame of reference for what you're hearing, when you have an expectation, it actually changes what you're hearing. Illusions like this tend to circulate around the internet every once in a while. Like this one where, depending on which word you're thinking of, you might be able to hear either Laurel or Yanny.
Laurel. Remember last year when that Laurel versus Yanny thing, everybody's going nuts over? Well, there's a kiddie version of it making the rounds right now.
This is from Jimmy Kimmel's show, and he starts by pulling up a clip from Sesame Street, of all places.
I move it to follow you.
Move the camera! Yes! Yes, that sounds like an excellent idea! All right.
And pay attention to this, because tell me if you hear Grover say one, two things. That sounds like an excellent idea, or that's a effing excellent idea. Are you ready? Okay.
Yes! Yes, that sounds like an excellent idea!
Kim, what did you hear?
It's a excellent idea.
You heard that?
Yes, I did,
It's the first time I heard it, I didn't hear a curse word at all, and then the next 12 times I watched it, the F word was all I heard, but...
Just in case you want one more go at it, here's Grover maybe making a lot of parents upset.
Yes! Yes, that sounds like an excellent idea!
This type of misperception is true to an extent with all our senses. We've all seen visual illusions, or you might remember the debate around the dress. But Diana eventually found that the various ways our brain edits the world, they're not just due to hard-coded differences, like whether you're right or left-handed. Brain editing can vary from person to person based on life experience. To prove this, she asked listeners to determine whether a pattern is going up or going down. For people who know a bit of music theory, this interval is a tritone, which is exactly half of an octave. So to get from note to note, you travel the same distance whether you're going up or down. If you don't know that much about music, all you need to know is that this is a particularly ambiguous pattern. But Diana does something really interesting in her experiment here. She plays the melody in a bunch of registers at the same time, so you might have an extra hard time figuring out if it's rising or falling.
And sure enough, you get huge differences from one individual to the other. And this is something that really does surprise people.
I hear it going up, and Diana found that other people hear it going up, but some people hear it going down. What's truly mind-boggling is that Diana's found that the difference in how two people perceive this pattern, it might come down to where you grew up. Believe it or not, when Diana compared two groups, people from southern England and people from California, she found that the English people tended to hear this pattern as rising, whereas the Californians heard that same pattern as falling. Diana's hypothesis is that based on where you grow up, you tend to hear different.
Has to do with the pitch range of the speech to which you have been most frequently exposed, particularly in childhood.
So if you hear that first pattern, which goes from the notes D to G sharp as falling, you probably hear this second pattern, which goes the exact same distance from the notes A to D sharp as rising, or vice versa. But ultimately, the mechanics of all this are still pretty much a mystery. Scientists don't really know how all this brain editing happens.
I mean, we know that the brain does that, but we don't really know how.
In a sense, it's almost like we're all listening to a play performed in our heads just for us. There's a script, the entire world of pressure waves bouncing around, but how we actually hear it all is up to the performers. In so many ways, our brain dictates how we hear the world. But even though we don't know exactly how our brain does this, there are times when harnessing that brain magic starts to become a lot more important.
It was like my hearing was pouring out of my head, like water out of a cracked jar.
Coming up after the break, one man's quest to hear his favorite piece of music again. That's next.
more.
Yeah, they do.
Women also want more.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I'm talking about. Testosterone. Today, on Today Explained, the hormone of which ladies and germs cannot get enough. Everyone's on T. Should they be? Stay tuned. Weekday afternoons, wherever you get your podcasts.
Let's bring that bass back.
Oh, yeah.
Give him a big T finish.
Support for the show comes from Udacity. It really feels like the AI train is leaving the station. Choo-choo, full steam ahead. Whether you're ready to jump on board or not, choo-choo. If you want to figure out how to get the most out of it, Udacity says they can help, no matter what field you're in. Udacity is an online learning platform with courses in AI and tech, including generative AI, agentic AI, Python, data science, and more. When you learn with Udacity, you're not watching exercises and projects that prepare you for the. In fact, Udacity just launched a master's degree in AI. Right, a master's degree. Choo, choo. The tech field is always evolving, and you should be too. You can try Udacity risk-free for 7 days. You can head to udacity.com/unexplainable and use code unexplainable for 40% off your order.
Good Noticings, Ashley.
Good Noticings to you, Claire.
And to listeners,
welcome to Good Noticings. What is in Kevin Federline's memoir?
Who is Mel Robbins and why should we let her?
Have you seen a Wonder Market popping up in your neighborhood?
Have you eaten it? Why is it so disgusting? Who robbed the loon? These questions and why we are deep diving into as we read all of the hottest articles about the buzziest cultural moments from last week and we discuss them with you, our dear listeners.
We read beyond the headlines to talk about.
Hired from work to form an opinion. We'll come up with one when you can.
Good Noticings, the podcast where we are looking around and noticing stuff.
We've noticed that Kristen Bell and Dax Shepard have a weird marriage. You guys noticed that one recently?
You guys ever think about that? Because you can think about it with us everywhere you get your podcasts.
Move the camera! Yes! Yes, that's an excellent idea!
Unexplainable, we're back. And we've been talking about the mysterious way our brain filters, edits, and even reconstructs the world that we hear. For some people, this kind of brain magic can be interesting to highlight as a party trick, but for others, it can be way more important.
Okay, testing 1, 2, 3, testing.
This is Mike Chorus.
So it's like you take the word chorus, just add a T at the end.
Mike's a science writer who was born with severe hearing loss, but he was able to use hearing aids. And starting from when he was 15, he became obsessed with Bolero, a famous piece by Maurice Ravel.
It was this riotous melange, which such a fascinating drum beat underneath it all really thrilled me and fascinated me.
He particularly loved the way the melody would gradually evolve over the course of the piece.
Each repetition is on a higher level, it's louder, the resonance is deeper, until it reaches the climax. So it's a very auditorily overwhelming piece of music.
He would listen to Bolero over and over and over.
It was kind of my piece of music that I would come to again and again and again to test out new hearing aids. So it's always been an auditory touchdown for me.
And then one day in 2001, the limited hearing he still had started disappearing.
I was standing outside a rent-a-car and I suddenly thought that my batteries had died, my hearing aid batteries.
Suddenly, the traffic on a nearby highway started sounding different.
It was just that sound that you associate with cars going by, you know, vroom, vroom, vroom. But all of a sudden it sounded more like It was as if somebody had dumped a whole bunch of cotton onto the highway.
Pretty soon, Mike found out he was quickly losing what was left of his hearing.
It was like my hearing was pouring out of my head, like water out of a cracked jar. So after about 4 hours after that initial realization, I was essentially completely deaf. It was just such a shocking experience.
But Mike was eligible to receive a cochlear implant. It's a surgically implanted device that can offer a form of hearing in some deaf people. Many people in the deaf community prefer to communicate using sign language or lip reading rather than using a cochlear implant. But for some people, especially people who've lost their hearing later in life and want to continue using their native spoken language, cochlear implants can be helpful tools.
The cochlea is this tiny spiral-shaped organ inside your head, and a cochlear implant is a string of electrodes that's carefully inserted inside that spiral organ.
This is Matthew again, the audiologist, who actually works with cochlear implant users to help them understand their experience.
There's this external part that looks like a hearing aid, but is not a hearing aid. It's a microphone and a computer that analyzes the sound and sends instructions to those electrodes that are inside the ear.
The implant essentially bypasses a lot of the ear. It directly activates the cochlea, which then passes an electric signal onto the brain. But cochlear implants don't just reproduce normal hearing. Mike says that reducing sound to digital ones and zeros and beaming them directly into your brain, it can sound strange.
It was shocking. It was not at all what I expected.
When Mike's implant was turned on, the first thing he did was listen to his own voice.
And my voice sounded really weirdly high-pitched. I almost sounded like, that kind of sound. It was like listening to a demented mouse.
Matthew actually gave me a program he uses as an audiologist to simulate various types of cochlear implant sounds. So here's a general idea of what it might have sounded like to Mike.
It was very upsetting. I thought the world would sound pretty much like I heard with hearing aids, just fuzzier. I was completely unprepared for the huge difference in pitches.
Because of the way the implants are designed, they tend to make everything seem a bit high-pitched.
So when you send a signal to any part of the cochlear implant, the brain will interpret that as a high-pitched sound, even if it's a low pitch.
Which is why everything can sound all mousy.
But the interesting thing is, within just a day or two, I started to hear low pitches again. And part of that was my brain adapting to it. My brain was saying, okay, this is my voice. I know it's supposed to be a low pitch. However, right now I'm hearing it as a high pitch. Never mind that. Because I know it's a low pitch, I'm going to interpret it as a low pitch.
Essentially, Mike's brain was editing the world for him.
So very quickly, my brain started figuring out, okay, the world sounds really weird, but I'm going to try to fit that into my preconception into what the world is supposed to sound like.
He was taking command of his own top-down processing.
So within hours, I stopped sounding like Mickey Mouse to myself.
And then Mike started training.
I got the audio books of the Winnie the Pooh books. And I remember the first time I put the tape into the cassette player and played Winnie the Pooh and some bees, I think that's the one. I couldn't make it out at all. It was just complete gibberish.
But he also had the physical book, so he read along with the tape.
So I was able to start matching up the weird input that I was getting with the words on the page that told me what that input meant.
What about a story? Said Christopher Robin. Could you very sweetly tell Winnie the Pooh one?
This is what the S sounds like. This is what the phoneme Pooh sounds like.
Winnie the Pooh.
So it is a process of remapping.
According to Matthew, this process of brain remapping is a pretty normal experience for cochlear implant users.
Any good audiologist would say to someone, if they're thinking about a cochlear implant, that when you first get it and it first is activated, you probably won't understand much at all. But over the first 6 months, maybe the first year, your brain learns to reorganize how it associates sound with meaning.
Training's more accessible these days. It's certainly not as DIY as it was for Mike 20 years ago. But this kind of improvement can still be hard to believe.
A lot of the people that I've worked with will say, now when I listen to my spouse, it sounds like her voice, which baffles all of us who work in this field, because if you look at how the ear's being activated, there's no explanation. I mean, not to be too on the nose, but it's unexplainable, right? So there's no way that could possibly be true, and yet a lot of people say it.
Tweaking settings on the implant does make it work better, but that doesn't account for most of this incredible improvement.
A lot of the success of the cochlear implant is really a testament to how strong the brain is working, rather than a reflection of the high quality of the sound input.
Our brains have an almost uncanny ability to predict language and fill in gaps, even when we hear something muffled or distorted. But while cochlear implants work pretty well for speech, they don't work nearly as well for music. Music is just a much more complicated kind of sound. You need to distinguish melodies and harmonies and textures, and most fundamentally, pitches. And an implant only has a small number of electrodes.
You have to simplify all the frequencies, and you can think of it as like pixelating the sound.
Making this even harder, because the cochlea is filled with fluid, it's hard to use electrical pulses to stimulate the exact part that codes for the right frequency. Instead, the pulses kind of spread out around the part that codes for that frequency.
Let me make an analogy. Suppose you're playing a note on the piano. You can be really careful and hit the exact key you want, or you can be kind of crude and put your whole hand down on the piano. Like, you're going to be in the right ballpark of the note, but you're not going to hit the exact note very clearly. So a cochlear implant is more like putting your whole hand down on the note. It's not a very precise frequency you're hearing.
When you take all of this into account, translating music with a cochlear implant can seem almost impossible.
The current design of cochlear implants isn't set up really for music. It's set up to understand speech.
But I wanted my Bolero back.
Even though Mike's brain had learned how to edit those high-pitched, tinny sounds to understand speech, music still wasn't the same.
It just sounded awful. I'm like, oh my God, you know. And it was really shocking because, like, even if it gets twice as good as this, it's still going to be awful. Even if it gets 3 times as this, it's still going to be awful. It was really bad.
Mike upgraded the hardware of his cochlear implant. He upgraded the software. He even volunteered as a guinea pig for some tests on new equipment.
So I would, when I was out of headphones, I would hear the sort of beeps and boops. I'm like, okay, which song is that? I was like, I don't know. It was like, could anybody know? And for me, this was a very deeply frustrating kind of experiment because I know Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. I was like, that doesn't sound like Twinkle Twinkle Little Star to me. How could this sound like Twinkle Twinkle Little Star to anybody else?
Researchers I spoke to told me that some cochlear implant users just don't enjoy music that much. It's certainly harder to get used to than speech, and because patients are often told to focus more on improving listening to speech, music can get left by the wayside. But appreciating music through an implant can sometimes be presented as an insurmountable obstacle. You can see this in the movie The Sound of Metal, where a musician gets a cochlear implant after losing his hearing, and then goes to this performance, listening to the song you're hearing right now. In this scene, the movie shows what other people at the performance hear, and then it gradually shifts perspectives to highlight what the main character hears through his cochlear implant. The performance is so that he ultimately takes his processor off. He essentially decides not to use his implant anymore. You can find a lot of simulations online like this. So I asked Mike if these kind of simulations, or even ones like the simulations I created of a distorted voice or a distorted bolero for this episode, if they seem like accurate representations of what music sounds like through an implant.
Yeah, you have to be extremely careful when listening to these simulations because basically what those simulations are telling you is this is what the software is giving to the user. Okay? That's not the same thing as what the user hears. These are two very different things. When I listen to these simulations, and I have listened to them, it does sound a lot like what I heard on day one. It does not sound like what I hear in year 20.
For Mike, this was a combination of training himself with careful listening, but also tweaking the settings of the implant. Because with a lot of practice and effort and time, the experience of listening to music can improve.
Yeah, I would listen to music over and over again. And I would try tweaking different settings. And I would go to my audiologist and I would say, these pictures sound really fuzzy to me. Can you do something about that? And so she would tweak how much electricity went to different electrodes. And so this was an iterative process that went on, and it's still going on.
After years of upgrades, tweaks, training, Mike's noticed some real improvement. But not for all music.
Most of the piece of music that I enjoy is music that I heard with hearing aids. It's familiar to me.
Mike does listen to some new music, but preferring familiar music, it's a pattern that Matthew notices with his patients too.
And I think it's a testament to the brain filling in those gaps, conjuring the memory of what the sound quality should be. The implant sort of gives you just enough that the brain can put together the whole puzzle.
And of course, Mike is listening to Bolero again.
But there are things that I know that I'm missing. I know that I'm still not getting some of that, the intensity and the purity, where the music is reaching for a crescendo in each of its iterations. So I know I'm missing that.
In a sense, Bolero is so familiar, it's almost like language for Mike.
Bolero sounds really good to me because I know exactly what it's supposed to sound like.
This new Bolero is certainly different from the version he remembers, but Mike loves the new version.
Even though the input I'm getting of Bolero is incomplete, and I can hear that it's incomplete, it is still a source of pleasure to me.
Ultimately, we don't really know exactly how our brain is able to do this. It can almost feel like magic, how it filters out echoes, how it shifts high tones to one ear and low tones to the other, how it can take a tinny, noisy input and rebuild a new version of Bolero.
We do this very complex calculation, but I don't think that we really know exactly how it's done.
Psychologist Diana Deutsch again.
There are an awful lot of things about our hearing that we don't understand, and what we hear is often quite different from what, in point of fact, is being presented.
But we do know that the brain is constantly editing, shaping, and building the world that we hear. Our brain, our life experience, our familiarity with a piece of music, it all shapes how we hear and what we hear, which raises a pretty fundamental question.
When an orchestra performs a symphony, what is the real music?
Is it in the mind of the composer?
Or is it in the mind of the conductor who has worked long hours to shape the orchestral performance?
Is it in the mind of someone in the audience who's never heard it before and doesn't know what to expect?
And the answer is surely that there's no one real version of the music, but many. And each one is shaped by the knowledge and expectations that listeners bring to their experiences.
The idea that to a very real extent, our brains conjure different individual realities inside our heads. On the one hand, it's a clear reminder to be humble, and not just for hearing. No matter how certain we are, what we perceive isn't unfiltered reality. So it's worth questioning ourselves at our most stubborn moments. At the same time, though, how cool are brains? I know they're this perfect reminder of our own subjectivity and humility, but I also just can't get over the fact that our brain puts on this fireworks show every day. And that a lot of people using a cochlear implant can tap into this almost magic ability to translate a few electrodes into this new, emotionally satisfying experience without scientists really knowing how the whole thing works. There's so much we still don't understand about the brain and how it tries to make sense of the world. And it just makes me that much more excited for everything we're going to learn along the way. This is just the first episode of 4 in our series, The Sound Barrier. On the next episode, a listener with tinnitus who heard this episode and got in touch to ask how to retrain her brain.
I was thinking about the cochlear implant, like how they had to train themselves in a way, you know? That's why I was like, should I reach out?
That's next time. As for this episode, it was reported and produced by me, Noam Hassenfeld. I also wrote the music.
Listening to Science Versus. This is the show that pits facts against the full moon. Does it change who we are? This episode about the full moon has been one of our most requested episodes this past year. You asked for it, so here it is. And to start our journey, we sent senior producer Meryl Horn out to brave the streets of New York City. Picture it. There's a chill in the air. Out in the east, the full moon was on the rise. And she ventured into a park to hear firsthand what people experience when there's a full moon.
Makes people wild. It makes them carnal. There's a carnal thing happening.
Everyone does not act right. It's terrible.
I think people are just wilding out. Calls out, you know.
I'm blaming the moon.
That damn moon.
Some people said that the full moon stirred up all this drama in their lives. One guy said that sometimes he doesn't even go out when there's a full moon.
I'm gonna stay in that night. I'm gonna play it safe, just like because I know I could feel weird, do crazy stuff.
Folks said you just knew it was going to be a full moon that night because people at work would be going bonkers. And this is in the research too. It shows that some healthcare workers think the full moon makes their patients behave stranger. One survey even showed that some doctors and nurses think they should get full moon hazard pay. Meryl heard about this as well at the park.
My mom was a nurse at the state hospital, and she had a lot of like psychiatric patients, and she was like, oh man, the full moon is the worst. It's the absolute worst.
So maybe
because people do act crazy.
I've worked in retail. I worked there for like a full year. Every single time on the full moon, we had the craziest customers, and I would tell everyone, I'd be like, it's the full moon, watch out. And they'd be like, it's not gonna be that bad of a day. It was the worst days every single day.
You still work there? Or?
No, I quit. I quit on the full moon, actually. Like fully quit on the full moon.
And perhaps the creepiest thing of all, people said that the full moon could make blood come out of your vagina. I mean, they didn't put it quite like that.
It definitely affects me from like the feminine cycle, the monthly cycle.
Yeah. Do you think you sync up with the full moon?
Yeah, for sure. My period will probably be coming because it's usually cycle with the moon.
Literally, I go to beauty school, I go to cosmetology school, it's mostly women. All their cycles synced up to this week, basically. So up to the full moon. So like they're in the middle of their periods, literally today.
So could the moon be affecting our body and our behavior in these strange ways? While this idea might sound like it belongs in the world of horoscopes, perhaps even fairy tales, some scientists have been taking it very seriously. And in the past few years in particular, there's been a slew of peer-reviewed scientific papers coming out and claiming that the moon really can affect our bodies in very surprising ways. So in today's episode, we are going to look at this cutting-edge science. And by the end of the ep, you might just be feeling a little carnal yourself. For hundreds of years, we've blamed all sorts of stuff on that
damn moon.
But then, there's science. Science versus the full moon is coming up after the break. Back today on the show, we're looking at the full moon. There's one coming up on Monday. And so we're asking, can it really influence us, change our behavior? and fellow lunar explorer, Meryl Hort.
Hi, Wendy.
Okay, so first up, can we just get a bit of a lay of the land? And could you just explain, why do you see a full moon or a half moon or whatever? Why does it change?
Yes, I can explain this. I actually brought a prop.
Oh, great.
Okay, so I have like a model of the Earth and the Moon for you.
Oh my God, you've really gone all out, Meryl.
Okay, so we are right now on the surface of the Earth, right?
Yeah, that I know.
Yeah.
Yes.
So imagine you're spinning around and around, the Earth is moving around and around. And when we are on the part of the Earth that's facing away from the sun, that's what we call nighttime, right?
Right, yes.
Well, the moon also has a side that's lit up and a side that's dark. And we see different amounts of that lit up side depending on where the moon is in its orbit around the sun. So when we see a full moon, it's when the moon is in this really particular position where you've got the moon on one side of the Earth and then the sun like on the other side. So it's almost like the sun and the moon are making an Earth sandwich.
Okay, and the Earth is in the middle. It's the meat cheese of the sandwich.
Yeah, and so the new moon, when the moon looks dark, is when it's in a different position. So in that case, the moon is like the meat of the sandwich, and the Earth and the sun are the bread.
Okay, so could just that fact that the billiard balls up in space are in this arrangement affect our behavior?
I mean, it feels like maybe far-fetched at first, but if you think about it, we know that the moon affects other animals.
That's right.
And you know, it's funny, the one thing that everybody associates with the full moon, wolves howling, I actually couldn't find any evidence backing that up at all.
Oh, okay.
But what I do have for you is that coyotes will howl more together on a new moon night.
That's what they sound like?
Yeah, kind of even creepier, right? Like, there are these coyotes that will, like, yip together in groups at the darkest time of the month. Some owls will call out more when the moon is darker, and badgers will pee more on stuff during a new moon.
But what about, wait, who's affected by the full moon?
I'm getting there.
Meryl, the episode is called Full Moon, not New Moon.
All right, and then on full moon, some birds will hatch more around a full moon. There's a little worm that does a mating dance that happens just after a full moon. Corals release their spawns a few nights after a full moon, which is an incredible event that you can see from space. And some primates, like nocturnal ones, will eat more during full moons. And I even found this one reference from the 1800s where a scientist said that rhesus monkeys were at their most fertile during full moons. So there are like all these ways that the moon is affecting animals.
Now we're cooking with the rhesus monkeys. We're in primate land. I feel a kinship. All right, but what about human animals? Meryl, are we affected by the moon? And why don't we start with the idea that on a full moon, hospitals get packed, patients are going wild.
Yeah. So researchers have actually looked into this. So there's, the thinking is that if the full moon really is making people act more recklessly, then maybe we'll see evidence for that in how busy ERs are. And I mean, there is just a long history of people thinking that this kind of thing is true. You can see it in our language, like the word lunatic that comes from the moon.
Right.
And so to find out if this is real, I talked to another Wendy Coates. Is that going to be confusing for you?
No, it'll make me feel right at home. So what does expert Wendy say?
Well, she's been an emergency medicine physician for over 3 decades, and she published one of the first studies on this question of whether ERs are more busy on full moons.
Okay.
It came out a few decades ago.
Great.
So I got in touch.
You reached out right around the time of the blood moon that was receiving so much popular press attention here. And every time there's something about the full moon, I kind of remember sort of nostalgically back to this study. Hi, I'm Meryl.
Whoa.
Tell us the story of Wendy's study.
So it all started when she was just an intern at a major trauma center in Pittsburgh. And she said that pretty quickly she started hearing about this idea that things might get busier when there's a full moon.
Okay, so you have to picture a bunch of emergency physicians and emergency nurses sitting around. Well, we don't really sit around, but, like in passing, or, you're sitting down to do your charting and somebody says, get ready. It's a full moon tonight.
What did they mean?
Oh, we're going to have all these terrible accidents, or, you just can't even imagine. Here I am, like a lowly intern, and like all of these super experienced emergency department nurses and physicians are like gearing up for just like shift. And so I was like, okay, well, this must be something.
Yip, 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 yip. Are you the coyote?
Yeah, everything inside of me wanted to go, oh, and then I realized that's no longer factually acceptable.
But those are during a new moon, remember? We have to rebrand the coyote if it's a new moon.
That's right. Corals don't make any noise. Okay, so Wendy, all her superiors believe this to be true. What happens next?
Well, so then she decides to do like a proper study on this. So here's what they did. She worked with her advisor and they got the records from her trauma center for a year, over 1,400 people altogether. And she looked to see like how many people were admitted, how bad are people's injuries, whether or not they died. And then they took the day of the full moon and also the day before that and the day after it to kind of look at all those nights around the full moon, and then compare those nights to every other night of the month to see like, okay, is there any difference here?
Was this night different to all other nights?
Yeah. Yeah, here's what she saw.
It was pretty funny because they're like, it looks like there's no difference.
Oh, no difference.
Yeah, there was no increase in how many people were admitted, how bad their traumas were, or how many of these patients died around the full moon.
And in fact, well, maybe there are fewer traumas and less severe traumas on the actual full moon days than the other days.
Less severe traumas, she said.
Yeah, a little bit. Which she thought about it and was like, oh, maybe this makes sense. Because on those nights,
it's brighter. So maybe it's easier to drive on dark country roads where lots of motor vehicle accidents occur. Maybe you're not quite as likely to go stab somebody because you'd be more visible to more eyewitnesses.
And since Wendy's study, others have come out looking at the same thing across the world. Like a couple studies from the Netherlands did see a tiny decrease in traumas on a full moon.
Decrease again.
Yeah, it was like better.
Okay.
And overall, a review of these studies said that there's no increase in how busy emergency departments are during a full moon.
All right. So Wendy, does she worry when there's a full moon these days?
No. Yeah, I asked her because she actually still works in an ER. Now, when you hear people mention this idea that, oh, it's a full moon tonight, get ready, do you say anything?
Nope.
No?
I never do because, you don't want to be that person. And you're like, actually, we studied this and we found that blah, 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 blah. Like, you just don't want to be that person.
Do you know, I feel like this will really land the point. Hashtag not all Wendy's, you know?
Or not, well, actually Wendy's.
Yeah. Some of us are well, actually Wendy's. Some of us are not.
And Wendy had this really lovely theory as to like why this idea sticks around the ER despite the lack of evidence.
Like if you have a group of people and they're united against some sort of assault. So, you're going to have this night that's crazy busy. You're not can get to eat, we get to go to the bath on the reason.
Yeah.
And just like, yeah.
Dang.
It's bonding time, and we can't predict who's coming. We can't predict how busy it's going to be. But what we can predict is that we're all there for each other, and that sometimes something like talking about a full moon, or the little look you give up to the sky as you're walking past one another gives you a little bit more encouragement to help you do your job well and be together with your team to take care of all the patients who come in.
Isn't that nice?
It is nice. It is nice. If only we could all be united by the full moon.
Yeah.
So where do we go to here?
Okay, well, so yeah, it doesn't seem like the full moon makes ERs busier. By the way, I also looked into this idea that there's more crime on a full moon. A couple studies looked at that and did not see anything there either.
Okay.
But Wendy, this does not put the kibosh on the whole idea that the moon can affect our behavior. Actually, after doing all of this research, I am more of a true believer.
Meryl Horn, never thought I'd see the day. Meryl Horn, PhD.
I know.
What did you find?
Okay, so there's this one super interesting study that I want to tell you about.
Okay.
All right, so it was done by Professor Horacio de la Iglesia at the University of Washington in Seattle. Have you ever howled at the moon?
Not really, not yet. But maybe, if I keep doing research on it, I might end up doing that.
Well, I think if he keeps doing research on it, he'll know that that's a myth, Meryl.
That's true. So he's done field work in Argentina, where he's from, with a group of indigenous people, the Tobacom, who are living in a really remote area with no electricity. And he was curious whether living in these conditions, the moon might be affecting their sleep.
Their sleep?
Yeah.
Essentially, they live very much in tune with the natural daylight and the natural light-dark cycle.
So there's no street lights, no
street lights, no light in the houses.
So he asks people to wear a device on their wrist, sort of like a Fitbit, but fancier, that tracks their sleep. 25 people agreed to do this. And then he plotted out all of this sleep data next to the lunar cycle to see if there were any patterns.
So if on a full moon people slept more or less.
Yeah. And he did see that on the days leading up to a full moon, people were sleeping less.
People were going to bed much later, up to an hour later, and sleeping by about an hour less.
Huh. That's a pretty big effect.
Yeah, that's a huge effect in sleep terms, right?
On average, it was about a 45-minute difference. And Horacio thought that it was probably the brightness of the moon that was doing this.
Yeah, right.
Particularly for this community.
We don't realize how bright the moon is, particularly when you are under totally natural light conditions, right? Because suddenly the sun sets, it gets very dark. If the moon happens to come up just before you're about to go to bed, it's nearly impossible to go to bed, right? You see the moon there.
It's that bright out there.
Exactly. You could even read under full moonlight.
Oh, wow. So then Horacio decides to look at places that weren't rural, like cities. He starts with a group of Tobacom people who are living in a more urban area.
Okay.
And weirdly, he found that their sleep was still affected by the moon. So now Horacio is like, okay, let's run the experiment again, where he lives in the US, in Seattle and Washington State. He gets sleep data from about 120 people there, mostly young adults, and he still sees the same pattern. So these people living in Seattle were also sleeping less on the nights leading up to a full moon by 20 to 40 minutes.
And so now he's sure it's not the brightness of the moon anymore.
Well, yeah, because this is Seattle. It's cloudy most of the time in the winter there, and Horacio is still seeing this pattern even in the winter. And then the moonlight is also competing with other forms of light in a city. Apparently, the moon, even when it's full, is still something like 50 times less bright than a single street light.
The fact is that we see very clear lunar rhythms in people living in a place where light pollution is way above the intensity of full moon nights, and we cannot explain that by moonlight.
So what's going on? Was it just that they were partying more on a full moon?
Yeah, you mean like going to like full moon parties?
I guess so. Well, you know, sitting out in the park watching the full moon.
I don't think so, because when you look at the data, it's not like people were like suddenly sleeping less just on the night where there's a full moon. What you actually see is this pattern where you kind of like sleep less and less gradually in the days leading up to the full moon, and then it kind of peaks, and then you start sleeping more and more and more, and then the full moon happens and you keep sleeping more and more, and it kind of goes like up and down in this like wave pattern. And Horacio saw this across all his data.
By now, I have no doubt that there's a lunar month modulation of sleep, particularly when you see single people doing this beautiful sinusoidal oscillation in their sleep.
Would you want to see the wave pattern?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, there's a very nice wave pattern there. Very intriguing. Huh.
It's a beautiful sinusoidal pattern.
It is a beautiful sinusoidal pattern.
So yeah, it really doesn't feel like you could like create that pattern of sleep even if you tried, right? It's not like people partying a little bit more.
Yeah.
And if the moon affects our sleep, then that kind of opens the door to it maybe affecting us in other ways too, because we